Hey out there, and welcome to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. Hope you're having a great day, and we're thrilled to have you here with us. I am joined by a fine cast of characters today, and we're going to talk through leveling up your content strategy and 5 steps to SEO success. With me, I have Aditya Saxena and Wayne Chahansky from iQuanti, and we also have Michael Brew from Conductor. Thank you all for being here with us. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you and your companies?
Yes, certainly. So I'm Aditya. I run digital consulting at iQuanti, right? And my area of focus is really to help brands formulate what is the right digital acquisition strategy. How do they think of cross-channel acquisition, right? And of course, I've been keenly engaged in organic search as a channel as well. So really looking forward to this conversation.
And I'm lost it there. Sorry, guys. I'm Michael Brew. I'm part of the leadership team, the Conductor customer success leadership team. Come with a background from 9 years running a global search agency, half media, half organic search. Love the SEO side of the business, and then joined WeWork there last year to bring their $100 million of global media in-house and SEO. That's a discussion for another day, but it was an exciting run over at WeWork, and happy to be with all of you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wayne Chahansky, and I'm the Vice President of Search and Site Experience. I head up the SEO practice at iQuanti, and I've been doing that for the last, quite some time before Google actually launched. Been in the space in performance marketing. And we've seen a lot of changes in the algorithm over the last few years. Love to discuss that. It's probably more changes in the last couple of years than the last decade. So I've been following the algorithm, came up from the UX, the dev side, and kind of worked my way up into the executive team in other brands, including iQuanti as well. So excited to talk to you. And with that, back to you, Heather. And
Awesome. All right, so we'll go through some quick housekeeping because this is going to be a great chat and we want to get to it quickly. So first of all, if you have any cool tidbits from today's learnings that you want to share on social media, please use hashtag SEJwebinars to share that out with your followers. And then if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to let us know. There are separate tabs for the questions in the chat, so just take a second to get familiar with those. If you see a question that somebody else has asked that you would like asked, give that a little thumbs up. So that upvote really tells us that that's something that you all are interested in hearing about. So at the end of the presentation, we will have time to take those questions and we'll get to as many of them as we can. You also have the option for closed captioning. It's up in your top right hand of the screen. So just click that little CC if you need those words there on the bottom for you. And then we'll do our best to link to any resources or tools in the chat. But if we miss one, just ask. All resources will be included with your recap email as well. And after the webinar, we ask if you can stick around for a short survey. It doesn't take any more than like 2 minutes. And this information really just helps us gauge what works and how we can make these webinars more useful for you. Lastly, it's the most asked question that we have. So you will absolutely receive the full recording of today's webinar in your inbox, so keep your eyes open for that. And with that, it's enough for me. Let's get to the good stuff. Gentlemen, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Great. So I think in terms of what we want to cover today, right? And of course, we are going to talk about content strategy, right? But focus more on what we believe are the core building blocks of a robust content strategy, right? And the things that we are going to talk about is how do we think about content in context of your business, right? And really begin to root ourselves in understanding of customer journeys, build our plans and the actual content strategy on top of understanding of customer journeys, translate that into really deciphering, okay, what is it that we need in terms of content, right? What are the gaps? What should we be writing about? What is it that our users and our audiences are really searching for, right? Once we have those two things in place, we have what we could easily translate into a content roadmap, right? And as the content roadmap manifests itself, right, how do we then look at addressing the core challenges which most organizations face in actually translating that into an actionable plan as well as executing against it? What have been our learnings, right, working across content and content strategy? We're going to cover those topics, and eventually the most important bit of it is to all bring it all together to say, okay, how do we now measure the return on this investment that you are making in content, right? And how do you measure the right kind of impact, right? As we go through this journey, and I'm going back to the headline of the webinar, which said 5 steps to your content strategy, right, or to SEO success. And here we are talking about 4. The fifth one really is prioritization, right? And in our experience, we believe, right, building a content strategy which really helps you pinpoint where do you prioritize your investments, where will you get the maximum results, and how fast can you get those results, right? Bringing that ability to know what is important for business and what can be driven faster is critical to this prioritization of content, right, planning. And that's really the fifth element of driving SEO success, right? So with that, I think we'll begin to unpack. And of course, we have before we jump in, right, just to get context going, what drives your content strategy today, right? So if that's a poll question which is open, you guys can kind of share that input. It gives us a good baseline of what you are kind of thinking about.
And I went ahead and launched that poll. And for our attendees, that should slide out of the side for you. If it doesn't, you can find that under the polls tab and go ahead and answer that. And we'll give you all a few minutes and then close that. And it looks like so far we're tied at 42% of people each looking at industry trends and ad hoc topic driven. So those are your 2 winners. Those are the 2 that drive content strategy for most of the folks on the call.
Great.
Great. And that sort of is a good segue into what we want to talk about in terms of building a foundation, right? And wanted to open up by bringing in a broader framework about how do you think about uh, starting the journey of content strategy and planning, right? And what we have learned over the years by doing this over and over again, right, is that the foundational building block of content strategy is really rooted in understanding what is the core product and service, what is the customer persona and journeys that those products and services are really addressing, right? And using that insight to really build the foundation of understanding what are the intents that people search for on Google searches, right, or any search engine for that matter. So really rooting the first step into understanding product, customer journeys, and then translating that into an eventual universe of what is it that people are searching for, what is the demand out there on search engines, is really the first step of defining the market landscape, right? And as we kind of go forward, we'll unpack what are the various things that we typically would recommend to leverage when you think about defining this market landscape. But once we have that building block, that becomes the foundation to say, okay, I know my customers, I know the core journeys, I know the intents and what people search for again in those journeys. And based on that understanding, how do we begin to define the core SEO strategy? And content is, of course, a core part of SEO strategy, right? So that's when we get into the second step of really developing the core strategy, which would help you address the journeys that customers are undertaking on, and what is the role of search there, right? And of course, as we kind of define the strategy, one core element is content, but we are looking at other aspects of the journey as well, right? Are people really thinking of these? What are the intents behind what people are looking for in your product and services? Is it primarily things that need to be fulfilled in a local context? Is it something which is a more involved, more long drawn journey which people are trying to engage in? What is the intent? How do we translate that intent into various pockets of a journey, right, from building awareness to eventually making a decision, right? And using that to really help build the core foundation of a strategy, right? And I'll kind of quickly bring in Wayne here, right? And Wayne, what has been sort of your experience in having built this strategy for various kind of industries, right?
One of the really key fundamental elements that I really want to highlight here is we're going to use the term intent quite a bit. And when intent is denoted, back in the old days with the algorithm, it was always about keyword prominence. Now that's switched, and with all the language models that Google has done, it's trying to understand the human behavior and how the grammar speaks and everything that happens. So it comes down to intent. And one of the things I want to make sure and stress on that Aditya had mentioned here was this funnel, this journey that we're talking about from upper to low funnel as it relates to the personas and your audience. What you want to make sure and do is to break those keywords and group them. We're going to talk about this in a later slide here, but I want to highlight grouping these by the intent is the most critical part of this whole stage. When you do that, you're going to be what we call as much algorithmic proof as possible, meaning as Google tries to perfect its algorithm and there's core algorithmic updates that happen, it usually has to do with relevancy and how it's interpreting the intent of a query. If you've done this process correctly, you're not going to have as many fluctuations in your rankings as you would if you did not do this. And I'm just going to give you a quick little insight on this, that intent is meaning the same thing on terms. So if you have a page that's got 50 or 75 keywords, there's no way that that page can actually rank for all 50 or 75 keywords, because there's no way that 75 keywords can mean exactly the same thing. So again, it comes down to intent, and we're going to go through how to do that and break that apart. But I just want to make sure that we understand this is where the time spent, the old age thing, measure twice, cut once. This is where you're measuring twice. Make sure that you spend the time, get these landscape correct, and then you can decide collectively as a business how far up the funnel you want to go as you do it. But this is going to drive your architecture, your URL taxonomy, your strategy, your on page, your off page. Everything that you do is going to be fundamentally rooted into this data here.
Yep. And I think as you kind of do this groundwork around defining the strategy, right? The second element of it which comes into picture is, okay, where do we get the right kind of insights that you're looking for, right? And we spoke about intent. So that is sort of in some ways rooted in finding the right kind of keywords, right? Then the other aspect of it is that how are you performing, right? Because the core aspect of building out a strategy is to also understand one, what is important to your business, which is the prioritization aspect. The second aspect is where will it be fruitful to put the efforts so that you begin to see results faster, right? And that prioritization aspect really requires an understanding about around what are the core underlying gaps from an SEO perspective, right? And those gaps are, what is your relevancy strength, what is your authority strength vis-a-vis what is competing on search engines, right? What you are competing against in search engines, right? So bringing that baseline understanding around what are the core SEO gaps is where the third pillar of this framework really comes into the picture, which is what are the right technology sets which can help you inform that, right? And that's where we work extensively with Conductor as a platform to really derive the right kind of insight around where are the gaps, how do we kind of baseline what needs to be worked upon, right? And what could be prioritized because the gaps are smaller, right? So that insight becomes really the third pillar of it. And Michael, if you would like to throw some more color around how the technology aspect of it would really strengthen the strategy formulation exercise.
Yeah, sure. So, an enterprise platform really gives you the ability to do some fabulous research, within the tool, and easy to really do the research around your intent keywords. And that really helps uncover, not only your intent keywords, but your competitors. And it helps you identify where you have content gaps, where your competitors might be winning, and you think you should own this keyword theme, but they own it, right? And we have a saying that, if you're not, you may think you're number one or two in the consumer's mind, but if you're number 7 in the SERP, that's how your customer sees you, as number 7 in the SERP. So, you need to do everything you need to do, right, to get the work done and get up to the top of that SERP. So the focus, as Wayne's been talking about, using technology really should bring some great efficiency. And I'm going to talk about agility as a part of content strategy a little bit later on in the presentation.
Great. And, of course, as we kind of get into the execution scheme details, right, one of the key aspects around content really becomes that as you build out the right strategy, you are investing in creating the right kind of content, right? how does that begin to drive return on that investment, right? And defining the right metrics which could help you measure your investment in content, and your success of your overall content strategy is absolutely critical. We are going to talk about what are the key metrics which we typically have seen have worked well in terms of measuring not just very bottom funnel metrics around performance or conversions, but also the impact of on overall brand awareness that content and upper funnel content particularly could drive, right? So that's really the last element of setting up the right metrics to measure success of your content strategy. And oh, okay, I got this one. Okay. So the next aspect of course, and as we kind of go forward, we'll spend some time talking about each aspect of the framework that we just, kind of did an overview. And this is really the first bit, right? Talking about interpreting user journeys. The way we kind of typically look at user journeys is that, of course, if we look at any business out there, right, there is a product context, right? And there is an involved user journey, which typically happens to understand when users are looking to understand either adjacent spaces around the business needs or the user needs that that product would solve, right? So it is very upper funnel. They have not really zeroed in on a product, but they are really trying to figure out what could solve a certain need that they may have, right? So really starting with user journeys which are up in the journey, are more focused on when they haven't really necessarily zeroed in on what they need as a solution, as a product or a service, right? That's really the upper funnel part of the journey. And then eventually there is, of course, um, as a user evolves in that journey, they begin to compare, and there is a role for understanding what is the journey and what are the intents which define when they know what product or services they are looking for, but they're really looking to evaluate, right? And then eventually, as they continue to move down the journey, how do you address those aspects of journey through the right kind of content in more bottom funnel stages, right? So if we look at this end-to-end spectrum, we are really trying to understand, do we have the right kind of content assets or pages out in the market which can act as the right starting points for journeys for users at various spectrum, irrespective of where they are in this spectrum of journey, right? They have a right entry page to start that user discovery journey, right? And that's another way of saying that when we look at the market landscape, when we define the universe of user intent, can we really lay it across this entire path to purchase and understand what are the intents, and hence as you roll several intents closely tied together into themes and sub themes, do we have the right assets out there from a content perspective which could act as entry point for users in their journey, right? And again, I think I'll bring in Wayne here to give probably an example of how this translates into an actionable user journey mapping.
Yeah, I have a
Mm,
saying that if SEO is done
mm,
correctly, every single page of your website is the entry page. And what I mean by that is that obviously you're going to create content for the user to read it. We're not going to do SEO content. No such thing as that. But when we create content, the idea is for it to answer a question. If we mapped out the journey, everybody's at a different stage of that journey in their mind. So if we map that out correctly and we have content and it ranks number one, people are going to enter at those points of entry based on the query. And that's what this diagram is kind of showing, that if you have a content asset in the middle, the consideration set of the funnel, and it's ranking number one, and somebody comes into that journey there, that's great. Now, if you don't have a content asset and a CTA that's connecting either to move up or down the journey, then what happens? They're going to bounce back out. They're going to go back to Google. They're going to type in a new query, and they're going to go into somebody else. And if somebody else's website actually connects the rest of the journey, even though you had the first point of attribution, you're still going to lose the sale. So what we want to do is make sure that you have all the right assets in the market. And the reason for that is to gain that that point of entry, as well as solve for a broken journey. You want somebody to be able to move up and down the funnel, but more importantly, you also want them to be able to come in at any stage of that journey. And that's with the right content, which goes back to mapping the right assets, which is the right intent based across that whole journey of what you want to do.
Great. So, and as we think about these journeys, right, one of the sort of activity based view of how do you begin to understand the market landscape, right? And this is where we get into a little bit of details around how to really approach keyword research foundationally, right? And of course, the idea is that we have built a core understanding about the product and the customers, and then we are trying to identify what are the various things that people are searching for, right? And then there are several sources, right? And I'm sure we have all used some of these sources when we kind of build out our market landscapes, right? But typically the things which work are, of course, the Google keyword planner keywords, existing organic footprint of your own site, your competitor's site, right? Looking at Google trends to really understand what are the topics which people are really searching for and are indexing higher than usual around your core product and services, right? And of course, here again, Michael, I think Conductor brings in certain amount of specialized feature sets to really enhance the keyword research, and how does that kind of add to the overall keyword discovery process?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you have used SEMrush, and they're a big partner of Conductors, and that's integrated with a massive keyword set. We believe we have, the biggest keyword set out there, and that's what helps us, as you go in to do your research, have this robust framework globally across, all kinds of search engines in language. To be able to do your research. One of the things I loved in conversation with Wayne the other day was, since many of you are immature, that your companies are immature, not that you are as SEOs, but you know how hard it is to get SEO, as and content, important, prioritized within the organization. I love the starting, although you break up your intent stages, maybe starting at that consideration and looking at that through your transaction stage really will help, right? You of course, keep that awareness there, but maybe focusing content as we're starting and listening to what we're talking about today, focused on consideration right through to transaction, and get some great successes, because we know that that awareness stage is a longer term play for from the content side.
And
Yeah.
and sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I
Well,
was
in
just
fact, as you kind of come in, I was about to ask you, and what are some of the don'ts here, right? As you
yeah,
look
yeah.
at, yeah.
So that when you do keyword
Mm.
research, I look at it doing a couple buckets. One, pull your existing organic footprint from your website. That's your baseline, right? That's what you're going to compare things to. Then pull the keyword research from your competitors, and then pull from the SERP landscapes. The reason I'm saying those differently is your brand competitors and your SERP competitors are often two different areas. But if it's ranking in the SERP above you, it's a competitor, regardless if it's the Wall Street Journal or if it's an aggregator or some other type of website, government agency, whatever it is. If they're ranking above you, they have a footprint. So pull that. You're going to cross-reference that data and find the gaps within your own footprint. And then you can take expanded research on that. There's a lot of good tools, as Michael mentioned, whether it's SEMrush, Bright Edge, whatever. The keyword research tool is going to be. And as you're doing that, you can look at additional themes or additional keyword data, and you put that into a master list. Then you're going to create and compile a whole list of what you want to do, and then it comes to the theming part. And one thing about the theming that I want to mention um, is that when we get there, we're going to talk about how to break those into the proper sub themes based on the intent. And I'll show you a couple examples coming up here.
And I think as we are kind of talking about market landscape and keyword discovery, one of the key aspects is certainly that a lot of times we find that the keyword universe is fairly significantly broad, right? And there's a lot of demand, lot of terms which people use, right, across the path to purchase. And the question around content strategy is always, with limited resources, where do you focus and how do you prioritize, right? One and This is just to pictorially depict that there is a method which we could really leverage to find out what is the core intents in your in your market landscape, right? What are the core terms which are very closely related to the customer journeys, which define the path to purchase? Identify that core set of, typically we have seen around 500 on an average, right? It's a very ballpark number, but that could be the set of keywords which are very core to your what your users typically search for, right? And are core to your business. Start there, expand it to look at the end-to-end journey from awareness to purchase stages. That could be a larger set, and then eventually you want to expand further to really identify what's adjacent to what your product or service is, right? And that eventually is a fairly large set of keywords. It could be anywhere, 5,000 is just a number. It could, in a lot of cases, we have seen much larger overall universes. But as you begin to think about content strategy, the key thing becomes, where do you prioritize and how do you prioritize your investments? Because you want to see the right kind of results in terms of bottom funnel, or the business, the metrics which impact business, right? Drive the right kind of traffic. So start at the core and then expand upwards is typically, one thumb rule of prioritization, right? And when,
Yeah, and to add a little bit to this too, that this is really a strategic kind of approach to this, that when you look at the core, when we're meaning those cores, those are your down funnel terms, most likely what we call an L1 layer in your architecture, meaning the top level layer. And then that could be within the L2 as well, L1 and L2, meaning that they're the primary categories. Once you need to get all of that into market first, because that becomes your door opener, your gateway to that content cluster. And what you need to do from there, after you've been able to achieve all of that core terms, then you can move into the supporting and then the adjacent. And that's just growing your footprint, growing your content strategy. And you can kind of make sure, and you can start adding a strategic focus on that too, with the lens of, are there certain themes that are more prominent? Does it yield a higher profit margin on your product or service, a better close rate? All of those types of things might help define how you kind of prioritize second and third tier content. But we want to make sure and get the core into market. That way we can latch on to supporting other content and interlink the content within those clusters. And then we would cross-link the clusters from one to another where it's appropriate. This is a really good example I wanted to kind of share with you. Now, this is just a random set of keywords. And when you look at these terms like credit cards, apply for credit cards, credit card offers, credit card application, new credit cards, it looks like these terms should all fit on one page. There's not that many of them. What's there, 8, 10 of these or so? It looks like these terms all are the same type of intent and should sit on the same page. However, again, coming back to the intent, I can't stress enough that you have to do this, and there's not an automated way of doing this. This is a subjective exercise, but the answer is in the Google SERP. If you don't know, go to the SERP, figure it out. But here, look at the reality of this. This is not one page. It's actually 4 different pages from a content strategy standpoint. And the reason why it's 4 different pages is because there's multiple intents. Rule of thumb, anytime the intent of a keyword changes or pivots, it's time for a new page. So in this example, apply for a credit card application, and apply for credit card online, and sign up for a credit card all mean the same thing. They all mean that you're trying to apply or get a credit card. Now, credit cards, new credit cards, and compare credit cards is a little bit more broad. It's a little bit higher up funnel, but they all mean the same. You're trying to compare and figure out what offerings are out there. Where a secured credit card and a credit card to build credit, those intents are the same. And then credit card offers is just kind of by itself within this subgroup here. But the point is, don't look at keywords by the derivatives or a partial match, as we would call it, that belongs on the same page. That is by far not the truth. You want to look at the intent behind the terms. So know when you type something in, what is in your mind? What are you thinking of what's going on? What are you actually looking for? And this is critically important to the success of your content strategy campaign.
And I think that's a good segue into really looking at how do you really think about content gaps, right? And Of course, we spoke a lot about landscape, right? And how you kind of begin to discover the landscape. Once you have the core, identification of the landscape done, right? The next step is really to look at, okay, what is the content which is published out there, right? How does it map to the intents that Win was talking about, right? And of course, the process bit of it is to really look at an overall inventory of URLs which are out there live, right? See what is ranking for what kind of intent, right? And of course, we would typically recommend doing this exercise at a cluster of keywords which are closely related in intent, right? We could call it themes, topics, subtopics, right, of that nature, right? But really doing that inventory of what's published out there, right, and identifying whether a particular content piece which is already published is addressing the intent of the key keyword or the hero keyword in a particular sub theme or a topic, right? So once you have done that step, then it kind of gives you a good sense of whether the intent of what the keywords are indicating is matching to what you have already sort of published out there, right? And this exercise also helps us decipher where you don't have any content published against certain intents, right? And that is what we would typically call a content gap, right? You need a certain kind of a content or a new page out there to address that intent, right? So from a process perspective, once you have kind of done what is existing in your URL inventory, which intents does it really address, and where are the gaps, that becomes sort of the first step of doing content gap analysis. And Wayne, if you want to sort of give an example around this.
Yeah, and as we look at this here, one of the things I do want to mention before we get into any example is that it's important to do this for the understanding what the whole picture looks like. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, we don't have the budget, we don't have the resources, we can only do, it takes us 3 months to do one page in market, and it doesn't make sense to sit here and try to identify a 200-page gap. However, what is important, I think, is there's no way that you can kind of finish a race if you don't know where the finish line is. You have to kind of understand what you're going after and what the value of that is. Is the climb worth the view? So SEO is actually forecastable, that you can predict it. The total search volume of these themes add up, and then there's a CTR for a click-through rate on the SERP position that will equal the traffic. You can do the math on it, you can do the equation, you can apply your conversion and get kind of a revenue model of what that looks like. But the biggest advice I can give to you is do the homework, do this, and understand your true content gap. Then you go into a prioritization. You may not be able to do everything at once, but then you start picking and choosing. I always recommend L1 and L2 first, and then you can add L3s and L4s as you kind of go through there. You can do the other business prioritizations as you do this. But creating the content gap is super simple after you've done all the hard legwork on getting the intents and all the theming correctly done at the keyword level, which takes a little bit of time. And this is that prioritization that we're kind of talking about. When we kind of move into some of the prioritizations, there's different ways you can look at this based on the demand. When we talk about consumer demand, that's the same as search volume. So SEO people know this as search volume. Marketing people know it as consumer demand. They're kind of identified as the same thing. You're going to look at the demand of the terms, the theme, and then you're going to look at the difficulty to get those to rank, which could be the gap in authority or the gap in relevancy. There's a couple great enterprise platform tools. Conductor can help with this. iQuanti's got a proprietary algorithm as well that can help with this. We can score different things on different algorithmic signals and kind of give you a scoring of 0 to 10, if you will, and to prioritize which efforts kind of should be first and second as you kind of go through this. So we would take more of a quantifiable or a data science approach. We don't look at things kind of emotionally. One of the poll questions was, looking at content as an ad hoc. We don't do that. We look at everything rooted in data science. We feel that it's the best. It's where the volume is, where the consumers are. There's a strategic kind of component to this to have your success that you want to go after. You're going to invest time and money, so we want to make sure that you get the right return on investment.
I'd say an element as well, Wayne, you can kind of jump on this to prioritization also becomes knowing your company and your ability to get things done, right?
Yeah.
The ability to actually implement. So in cases, whether it's technical fixes, whether it's new content, how long is that going to take to get up, and how can I prioritize based on search volume, based on intent? So another key factor, to really look at as you're looking to try and show some quick wins to your leadership.
Michael, that's a great point. And this is a really big difference between small and medium-sized businesses and your enterprise-level companies, right? A small to medium, you can jump into your WordPress, your CMS, you make the update, and by the afternoon, it's up and going. Your enterprise, that might take 3 months to make that same update. And I think, Michael, you're going to talk a little bit about that agility and the cadence of that. But when you're looking at the content, even though you control it, which should be the easiest lever to kind of modify, it can also become a challenge. So we want to kind of look at how to group those challenges together. Looks like there's a poll, another question here as well.
I launched that while you gentlemen were talking, and almost 50% of people said a combination of the above.
Okay. Great.
And I think, of course, bringing all of this together into an actionable roadmap is the next sort of step. We spoke about prioritization. We spoke about all this detailed work which really needs to go into identifying the intents to begin with, translating that into a very robust keyword set which defines your market landscape, doing the hard work on theming and grouping the right intents together, then doing the larger inventory of content gaps, right? Once you have done that, you have translated that into a prioritized roadmap, right? That's really the foundational work. Then we are really looking at moving into the step 2 of saying, okay, now how do I begin to execute against this strategy and this roadmap, right? And that's where there are a few aspects which again come into the play, right? One of it is, as you begin to think about your content creation cycles, uh, how do you sequence them, right? And typically we, again, on the previous page, Wayne spoke about this overall prioritization roadmap. We would typically use that, translate that into almost a equivalent content calendar which breaks down based on the priority which has already been defined into sprint plans to say, okay, let's focus on these topics and sub themes in in the first 3 sprints, then go to the next set, and then go to the next, right? So really translating your prioritization into a roadmap is a critical step to know that you are investing the efforts in the right direction. The second aspect of it is, as you think about content, right, what intents you are trying to address, right? Now, and the question is, we know the intents we are trying to address. There is a lot of aspects around what is the competing content which is already out there, right? And Google is in some ways already sort of inventorizing that content, right? And given the competition, given the intents you are trying to address, what should you be writing about, right? And really that translates into the right kind of content briefs and understanding what kind of content will work and help you win against those intents, right? And there again, Wayne, from your perspective, what are the key things to keep in mind as somebody begins that journey of translating the content strategy into executable things like content briefs, right?
Yeah, I think when you look at a brief, we usually recommend getting a little bit more comprehensive. One of the things to convey to the writers is to make sure that they understand what the intent is. Again, going back, I know I sound like a broken record, but I can't stress this enough, that it's not that you need 2,000 words on the page or versus 150 words like the old days. It's, can you match the intent? Can you answer the question that that somebody is assuming is behind the query? And how do you answer that question? So when you translate this, the brief really needs to communicate that to the writers if it's not the same person or the individual doing the work, which often case in an enterprise environment is definitely not. And then you want to bring a competitive lens into that. Not only who's ranking, but what are they doing? Dissect the anatomy of the content to know what is that person doing, how are they successful from a content standpoint. Keep in mind, Bear, that just because you have great content does not mean you're going to rank number 1. You need the authority and the trust signals in order for that to rank. However, You can still be best of class in content, and as the authority builds, the content will start ranking and you'll start moving up. But when you look at the brief, make sure you get a good competitive lens. One of the things we talk about from, for example, Google's answer box is there's question types and then there's answer elements. And you want to look at how are somebody answering what the question of the query. It's kind of a game of Jeopardy. You have the answer, you just need to know what the question is. And then can you do that better than anybody else on the web that's currently answering it? Now, one thing to keep in mind is just because somebody's number 1 or 2 in the ranking doesn't mean their content is the best. It may mean it's just the best choice today. So you have an opportunity to kind of level up and do something better than that. But when you look at creating this, put the time, the effort, the resources. You want engaging metrics. You do want to create all the right attributes. There's the anatomy of the page, your title, your H1s, your H2s. All of these should read, give all the right traffic signals, a green light on the road so Google knows exactly what your page is about. And then you can kind of execute from there.
Great. And Michael, from a competitive insights point of view, how do SEO platforms really help in that?
Yeah, so as I'm going to talk about agility here, getting this done quickly is also an element of this. So right within a platform, certainly within Conductor, we have a really unique feature called content guidance. And so you're able to go in once you understand intent, to Wayne's point, right? And you've built your kind of intent framework about the keywords. Now you can go in and look at, okay, what's the competitor? What are they doing? What's making them win? So right within an enterprise platform like ours, you can look at, the top 10 winners in the SERP and exactly what they're doing. And it could show you, 7 out of 10 are doing this in their title tags, 6 out of 10 are doing this in their in their metadata, in their on page, whatever it might be. And you can then see, okay, what is it going to take to compete with them right away, and give you some great answers to then build your content brief. So that's, an element of agility when you can be able to look at the competitors so quickly rather than, kind of the way SEO has always been done, just pull these down one by one off the SERP, map it out yourself in Excel, and then figure out where you need to go. Some enterprise tools let you do this within a matter of minutes.
And that's really, almost recapping the things that we spoke about, right? And as we get into the specifics of content development, right, our experience has been there are a lot of ways to drive efficiency and agility. That is the theme around that. How do you drive agility in your content development processes, right? And that's where we'll kind of begin to unpack as we go forward, right? So, Michael.
Yeah, so, a tool is one big element to creating agility, right? If you're not working within an enterprise tool, you're looking at lots of different point solutions. And that takes time, right, to kind of pull this together, even though you have your way and your comfort level. But, this is an example. I'll be a little cynical here, right? We all know, it's so easy to do SEO, right? We get ready with some keyword research and content ideas. We, give a brief to the content writers. They write it, boom, it gets implemented. It's nice and clean, and our job's done, right? We take some technical fixes and goes right to the web team and they implement. But the reality is, we know this is not what happens, right? This is not our, lives within, the SEO world, right? This is a little bit more of what we see. And we've kind of broken these into what we call high growth and flat growth, or mature and a little bit less mature. So interviewing hundreds of companies, we see the ones that get it, that can get this thing done right, they can publish a web page within 2 weeks. Slower companies, less mature companies, the flat growth, that could take them 2 months or more, right? Same with if we're looking at title tags. High growth company can get this done in a matter of a couple of days. Flat growth could take up to 8 weeks. We've looked at even meta descriptions. High growth company, 4 days. A slow growth company, flat growth, could be 6 weeks. And because this is what happens, right? This is what happens. This is more reality, and really many more blockers and stages within this. But, we've looked at, again, the flow of getting this done. And what's happened is there is so much lost time within this process. So outside of any kind of tool, whatever you're doing today, you can quickly implement a process to start to track end to end all from content creation to any on-page content, whatever your core deliverables that you're going to be creating. How long does that take you to execute? And then where's the lost time? How can I shave that lost time down and really put together a plan and a team? In some cases, like you can create a little team together, your SEO content and web team, and start to have meetings and break this down, because the faster you can go to market, right, the faster we can, Google can start seeing the content, and we can be seen. Which we know is not easy, especially with early stage content and getting into the SERP. We know that's going to take time. So how does this really translate into action? Teams that are flat growth, they're in silos. And even the giant companies that may be mature, we know what happens when these are sitting in silos. I haven't found one company where SEO, content, and web all report to the same person. And that's one of the elements that we deal with every single day in trying to get this done. And then we have those blockers in those silos, right? How many times have you run into web dev guys that had a bad experience with an SEO, and they're reluctant to, have those SEO changes become, a big part of their fixes, even though it's critical, right, to the performance of their website. So no silos, the collaboration is what's key here, changing the behavior within your organization of SEO, content, and web, creating good process, whether it's in an enterprise platform or just outside, to get this stuff done, and great communication, all getting aligned on what's the company's goals. One of the big issues we do see a lot is the CMO has goals, right? The company has these goals. And when it kind of comes down then to the people running SEO and content, they typically become a little bit more MBO oriented and maybe don't map as well back to the CMO's goals. So if you can start with those high level goals, you have a much better chance of kind of getting a seat at the table as you show them how quickly you can bring this content out to market. So for the agility metrics, look at content time to live, look at content change time to live, and look at technical changes time to live. Really critical. Technical is really important. I know we're talking about content here, but that's a case where you need to get some fixes done. It can take you weeks to get those done. You can just run into a real loss for your business. So embrace reality. Eliminate the inefficiencies, and you know what they are. This is not a hard thing to do for you to lay out and run. And think about that always on mentality. That really means, SEO is a strategy. I believe, Wayne talked about this. It's not a channel, right? It's a strategy around content, around everything we do on the web. And we'll come out with one more poll.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about agility, Michael, there is another aspect to agility, which is really predictability of an outcome, right? While you go through all these process inefficiencies to get a content out live there, right? How do you even know it would have the outcome that we are looking for, right? And Wayne, I know that you have a point of view on that, right?
I do. As we look at the outcomes, I want to talk, there's KPIs, there's primary and secondary. Everybody knows rank and traffic is a great KPI, but that doesn't mean that it's an evaluation or reflection of the content. Again, you can have best of class of content and still not rank because you don't have the right authority signals to there. So what you need to do is you need to look at secondary metrics. And again, there's content scoring tools that can do this, that we can kind of provide that KPI. I know at Quanti, that's how we do that secondary KPI is we give you a scoring metric on how it relates, you're growing on that. As your authority builds, then you're going to get the primary KPIs. But you have to look beyond just the primary into another success metric.
Yeah, I really like that, Wayne. And as well, that focus on the business goals. I've seen this happen a lot, overlay what Wayne was talking about with the business priority. And I look at striking distance often for companies, and SEOs jump on those striking distance keywords because it's going to be easy, to kind of get them over to page one. But maybe half of them are not a business priority. So the prioritization aspect of your content strategy is critical to make sure it layers in and maps to your business strategy.
I think if we could take a moment to look at one of the questions which just popped up, right? And it's really talking about what really determines whether a 800 word piece of content should rank higher or a 3,000. word keyword, well written, well researched blog is ranking lower than 800-page word article, right? And when probably that's a question for you, right?
Yeah. Again, so the first thing is, remember, ranking's not the KPI that you want to look at. Because something's ranking higher or lower has it's only half the equation on how much the relevancy matches. So don't look at content that somebody's ranking higher than you, that their content must be better. You have to be able to break down the algorithmic signal and look at the relevancy only as it relates to the language models that Google's using. And again, that's kind of how we look at it at Quanti, is we break that down and we look at, does the actual relevancy signal, is that best in class? If it's not, then you need to modify and optimize that. But oftentimes what people will do is, because they don't know, they don't have that transparency, they'll make changes to a content based on a ranking factor. And what you can actually do is you can actually decline your content because you didn't know where it was baseline to begin with. So the 800 or 1,000 words or 2,000 words doesn't matter as much as does it match the intent of the query. Again, go back to that intent. If you feel solid and you have the anatomy elements and the answer elements that your other SERP competitors have, you can kind of feel good that you're on the right track with that.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that. And then when it comes to, measuring performance, again, iQuanti does this great. It's embedded into everything they do. A lot of we're partners for a reason. They use Conductor on many of their customers. But we look at, as we're looking at the intent stages, the digital presence, enhancing performance reporting, and of course, content guidance, which I mentioned, really do help you look at more quickly who's winning and how they're winning, and some of the basics that I need to do to my page, to kind of get me up there to win. And then we really, in evaluating performance, right? It's great to have, a tool, technologies that can help you look at this again quickly, anecdote where there are, algorithmic changes possibly that happened in the SERP. So, when those changes came in and maybe how that affected your performance, as well as then truly measuring ROI. And it's really tricky. We know in SEO, there are a lot of different ways to do this. I find SEOs don't put enough of a stake in the ground with ROI, because I think we have the best ROI that's out there, the best cost per customer to acquire a customer, the most loyal customer, the highest conversion rate is all through content and organic marketing. And that ultimately, if you start to bring all of the costs together, you'll see that we are delivering, we as a group, the SEO and content world, a better ROI that's coming out of the media side of the business. But in measuring it, we need to build this comprehensive reporting, right? We need to determine costs. And this is a little bit different by company. I would recommend you keep the website out to the side, because that's something the company needs. But take, your SEO staff, your SEO tools, your content. If you're, buying it on the outside, or you have people in-house, any tools related to that. When you get done looking at that and you look at your traffic and revenue, you're going to see a fantastic ROI that you can go back to leadership with. And that should get you more money to invest in content, to hire more content teams, to hire agencies like iQuanti to come in and, help you improve performance. Make sure you clean up your data. I mean, it's just critical. This is an element as you're measuring your ROI that's going to help you improve your ROI. And of course, again, whether it's Conductor or other technologies, whatever you're doing, leverage technology, because it's going to help you get there faster. That's an element to ROI as well. And make sure, again, your tech setup. I can't tell you how often, just the data integration is lost between, whether you're using GA or Adobe, and things aren't done properly integrated into these tech platforms. Hey, Wayne, while they're taking a poll, you want to talk a little bit about some ROI from iQuanti?
Yeah. Matter of fact, and I just wanted to answer the question that in the chat as well. I just might as well make that public too. The question was, if the search volume isn't there, is zero or low, does it make sense to write content about that? And the reality of that is the answer is no. That if your search volume on your keyword terms doesn't have any volume or demand to it, even if you rank number one in the world for that, nobody's going to click on it, so you won't get any traffic. So what good was that for you? Now, that the kind of air quotes around that would be if that is needed to support a theme or kind of more of a down funnel type of acquisition term, then it might make some business sense, just not some search sense on that. So you want to kind of look at the trade off between the two. Okay. Another question is Yoast a good software to use to boost SEO? Yoast, that's kind of a deeper question. It's a generic. I would not leverage my SEO practitioner on Yoast as a plugin in WordPress. There is some good components of it, and then there's some clutter in there that is not best practice or up to the things. So if you're using it as a complementary, there might be some insight to a writer, but I would not hinge all of my SEO organic growth on Yoast.
And in the poll, when we see that lack of resource or budget is the seems to be the biggest response we are getting, right, as challenge for building content, right, and that really is a moot point of building business cases for content investments, right?
Exactly.
And do you want to elaborate on what is the best approach for that, Wayne?
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into when you don't have the budget, most likely the business case isn't supporting it. Again, comes down to the volume. Let's say that you have 45 different themes, and the combined volume of the 45 themes is 1 million monthly search volume. That's huge. If you convert at an average CTR 1 through 10, the average CTR rank is about a 7% CTR. If you do that math, you're going to yield, the traffic on that is going to be significant. Now you can kind of build a business case to your executive team and say, listen, if we build content and there's this much volume, which means that there's this many consumers looking for it, and if we were to rank that, it does multiple things. One, it fills out our journey. It connects the journey so we don't have a broken journey. Number two, it adds many more points of entry, and we can capture all of this volume. Number three, if we convert the traffic based on our standard 3% conversion rate, it's going to yield X amount of millions of dollars in revenue to do this. Now you're able to present a business case that makes sense. And when you're asking for whatever money it is against the millions that it's going to revenue, then of course that's going to make sense. As Michael mentioned, the organic channel has got the best CPAs. I mean, I've seen CPAs on paid 250 to 1,000 CPA, where organic can do it in $30 to $45 a CPA. Of course, it takes some maturity to get to that point, but it's well worth the investment that you need to kind of make to do that.
Yep. I would just add, take a media mentality. I find SEOs were a little bit too soft.
Yeah.
You go to an SEO, leadership comes and says, we need to cut budget. They say, how much? Go to the media team and say, I need to cut budget. They're going to say, absolutely not. Our return on ad spend is, X. I need more money. We have room. We can bring this down to a 8-to-1 ROI and still do great. That's the mentality I think we need to take as SEOs to building these business cases. It's critical, and that's what leadership will respond to.
Agree.
And that's really, we spoke about a lot of things today. I think the key to summarize it is to really focus on building the right content strategy, and that's really rooting yourself into the market landscape, understanding that very deeply. There's a lot of detail and work that needs to happen to get to the right kind of content strategy, which is prioritized for your business needs. That prioritization is very closely linked to the ROI and business case of investment as well, right? Because eventually you can build a business case, but when you measure success against that business case, prioritization would be the key, right? And if you prioritize the right way, you will be able to demonstrate that success against the business case, right? And the last bit is, of course, there are technologies, there are things which are available which can really drive agility in the process of execution, right? And that again, directly feeds into seeing outcomes from your content strategy and your content investments, right? Because if you can't take content out there live into the market fast enough, then of course, all the ROI is sort of very stretched. It depends upon the speed and agility of execution, right? So eventually, by the time you get to the stage of measuring impact, the metrics are known, the business case of what needs to be driven is known, You have already executed and built a plan which is linked to prioritization and which will drive the results that you're looking for. And then at the end of it, you are just measuring the right metrics to see whether I'm delivering against the business case and against the plan, right? So it kind of all comes together if you have these building blocks in place, right?
Yeah, and I know we didn't get to a lot of questions, but please submit them. I will answer them. Myself, Michael, Aditya will all answer the questions for you. We'll send the response. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and chat. Love talking about SEO. So,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pop in here real quick because like you guys just did my job for me. So thank you. But Wayne, as usual, we have so many questions. I think we're gonna have to start making your webinars just longer. That's all there is to it. So with that, I'm gonna close this out, but real quick before we go, Wayne, I know you told the people where to find you, but Aditya, Michael, do you want to let them know how to find you?
Yeah, I think same thing. LinkedIn is probably the best way. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Great, community there. And I think you have our spellings from when they get the recording back. That would be great.
And true for me as well. I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to connect.
Awesome. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm always happy to connect. But hey, thank you all for joining us. We will get the questions over to you all. And yeah, hope you all have a great day. We'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks.
Bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.